All right. First off, thank you so much for coming to our event. We're really excited for this topic. A couple of announcements. We do have an upcoming Product Hive event. It's virtual coming up at the beginning of September. And then we're having an in-person event at Rain Focus at the end of the month with Brian Gates. So make sure you come to that event. It's going to be really great. Also, want to call out MX. They have all their remote employees in town, and they still chose to host us. It was chaotic at first, trying to navigate everyone in, but thank you for putting up with it, and thank you, MX, for hosting us. And we're going to just turn it over to Dave, who planned all this with us, to let him tell you what MX does.
Thanks, everyone. So my name is Dave Crow. I lead our product design team here at MX. And just a quick word about what we do here, because you're in somebody's office building. What does this company actually do? Fair question. So we are a financial technology company. Most of our clients are banks, credit unions, some fintechs, and we have products across a few different categories. Data, which is a lot of transactional data. We cleanse that data, clean it up, make it look nicer in people's experiences. Connectivity, helping end users connect bank accounts to different financial services, budgeting tools, all that kind of stuff. And then finally, on top of that sits our experiences, where we have our own personal financial management experiences that get embedded within our customers' online banking environments, as well as a fantastic mobile banking product. If any of you locally are America First Credit Union customers, their mobile banking app is built by us, actually. So my team gets to work on that. So if you like it, great. If you hate it, then it's America First fault. No, I'm just kidding. So that's a little bit about what we do here. Would be happy to chat more with any of you about that. And we're just excited to be hosting Product Hive here. It's been, I think, a few years since we've done on-site at MX here. So always happy to support, and thanks everybody for coming out.
Oh, yeah, we'll just do that going around. Okay, I'll see you. Thank you, Dave. Also, bathrooms, a couple people have asked. They're outside the glass doors to the right. So next, we'll introduce Ben. And first off, we've been talking to Ben for about a year trying to plan this event, and we finally made it happen. Ben works at Vasion, and Vasion's a really cool tech company. Hope, Ben, you'll tell him a little bit more about Vasion, but we want to thank Vasion for providing a killer lunch. J-Dogs, Zubas, woo! And we're going to turn it over to Ben. Thanks, Ben.
All right, is this working? Audio is decent? Okay. Thanks to my plant over there for sharing for me. But I'm grateful for the opportunity. Like Jeremy said, it's been over a year that we've been talking. And when he first approached me, I was like, sure, I could do that. And as I thought about what I'd want to speak to and what I'd say, I got more and more nervous. And I pushed it back a year. I was like, the thing I'm working on, I feel like I haven't made enough traction. And I want to get to a certain point to I feel like I can look back and say, hey, we've accomplished the thing. Well, here we are a year later. I don't feel like I'm there yet. I continue down the journey, and I've got a number of team members here that know all too well what that journey is looking like. And so we're going to get into a little bit, but there's something about this description or this event. Maybe it was the free lunch. I know Dallin came for the free lunch, but something got you here. So I hope that in our time together, you can take something away from this that either is new information, either maybe reminds you of something you already know, just encourages you to keep going on whatever you're working on. So thank you to Product Hive for pushing me to participate. Thanks to MX for hosting, and then we'll dive into it. So I'm gonna go back a couple years. There's a few people, okay, here we go. Rewind 2 years, I was working for a company, I'd been there for a short amount of time, and I made the decision to leave. And it wasn't the right fit for me. It was an organization going through some change, and there were a number of factors there that weren't working for me. So I left and I started consulting for a company, and I started to get an itch to go back into something where I really took more ownership and control over what I was doing. Being in consulting, I had started looking into, trying to make side hustles, main hustles, that sort of thing, trying to look into maybe buying a business. And I got to this point where I started to narrow in on the things that I really cared about in the next role. And right about that time, when I started to identify what those were, I got introduced to Vasion. And so Vasion is first and foremost known as for its main product, which is printer logic. That used to be the name of the company. So if anyone knows, they're headquartered in St. George. We have an office just right over here, this next building. So it was a nice convenient walk. Thanks, MX. But they're known for printer management. And so they rebranded as a company, and their primary outcome or their primary goal was to eliminate print servers for their customers. But when I got introduced to the company, I started meeting with the leadership, and the leadership was looking to move into an adjacent market. They saw an opportunity outside of what they were currently doing. And so they wanted to move from print into business process automation. So the mission became make digital transformation attainable for everyone. A little bit different than eliminate your print servers. And there's a big change with where the company's going. For them, they have a core product that does great. It's growing, very healthy, and a very stable business. But they see this opportunity. And so I started interviewing with the company, and I got introduced to who's now my leader, the hiring manager for this role. And he talked about, hey, we've got a situation where our product organization needs to scale and meet this opportunity. We see an opportunity for growth. Our current approach, very project-centric, very output-centric, right? I've read this book that I think I want to apply here, and I'm looking for someone to come in and help me. He was an engineer by background, had been very close to product for a long time, but had never led product. This was the first time. There was a reorg that happened just before I joined where he took ownership of product. So he's like, help, I need a product leader. So through the interview process, we talked about kind of the current situation, right? Shifting that team from projects and outputs to products and outcomes. And what are some of the other challenges they had? And one of those was taking the vision of where we want to go and balancing that with where we are today and reconciling that difference, because it's a challenge. So that led me to, I continued to interview with the team, saw a good fit, and joined. And that was just over a year and a half ago. So a little background on me. These are some of the logos I spent time at, and a lot of familiar faces out there. So some of you I've had the pleasure to work with and learn from and be a part of. But as I've worked at each of these companies, I haven't always been in product. And that's one of the things that I feel I bring to the table that's unique about my perspective on product management. When I was at Qualtrics, I did sales operations, and I helped scale their inside sales team to add an enterprise sales team, global expansion. When I was at Pluralsight, I worked in partnerships, and I worked in marketing operations and product management, and then other roles in other companies. And that diverse set of experience gives a unique perspective on all aspects of the business, not just this is product management or engineering, all of those things coming together. And so during my time at Adobe, I actually spent 2 stints there. But the first stint there, when I was there full time, there was a coworker and we worked very well together. It was kind of like a product manager engineer relationship. We worked in consulting. We worked with large customers doing primarily retail, but doing paid search advertising. So we managed their paid search budgets and keyword management, optimization, et cetera. And we're dealing with like millions of keywords across all their different campaigns and initiatives. And so we always had this debate about the difference between effective and efficient. You ever heard these 2 words used together? Right? We want a solution that's effective and efficient, right? Yeah, I want my cake and I want to eat it too. But that was always the debate we had. And as we worked on different solutions and we worked with our customers, we most often found first we could be effective and then we could layer on the efficiency. But it was never both at the same time, especially in a new thing that you were trying to solve. And that's always stuck with me and come back to my mind. And especially as I think about this relationship with outputs and outcomes, is the difference between effectiveness and efficiency, right? You want to be efficient. You want to use your time well, your team's time well. You want to go and pursue opportunities as quickly as you can. That time to market, kind of the holy grail of product management. However, you never know if it's going to be effective. Most often, the initial ideas that you have fail or aren't the right thing. So leaning on this experience that I have, I'm going to take a little bit of a detour. When I left that previous company I talked about, I made the decision to buy a motorcycle. And I'd never bought a motorcycle, never owned one, always dreamed of having one. But I also bought a motorcycle that didn't run. You can see this picture's not great because it's all black, but like the blinkers hanging, the gas tank was lifted up off of it. It didn't start. It was a theft recovery, and this kid didn't know what to do with it. He'd gotten a quote that was like 2x what the bike actually cost him originally. And so he's like, yeah, I'm just trying to dump it. And I'm like, sweet, I got some spare time. I'm gonna go dig into this, right? And I bring up this example of that relationship with outputs and outcomes because as I looked at this, being brand new, diving into forums and trying to figure out, okay, first I'm gonna solve all the cosmetic problems, like put the blinkers back on, the mirrors, those things. But the engine won't run. Okay, gotta get the gas tank reconnected, got it. So I started detailing this list of projects, all the things that I needed to do. And then I just got overwhelmed. But in getting overwhelmed, I stepped back and I thought, okay, what am I trying to accomplish here, right? Do I want an eternal project I'm always working on, or is the goal to have something I can ride and share with my kids, create experiences with them? So that became my outcome. My goal was to get it to run. And in defining that, it started to help me prioritize which projects to do. I didn't need to this gas tank's dented and scraped. I didn't need to do that to get it running, but I did need to fix the clutch. And so I tore apart the clutch, put it back together, and got it running, got the engine going, but it would never click into gear. I was like, okay, it's running, but I haven't got to an outcome that I can actually ride it. And so I kept going through those lists of projects and the different outputs that I could produce. Disassemble the clutch, reassemble it. Turns out when I put it back together, I broke something. Had to go back, buy a new part, and I got it fixed and got it running. So today, it runs, right? But I think about this example in my personal life and translate that to an experience I had with a previous company. And in that experience, we launched a product in record time. And that launch of that product was celebrated as, yay, we shipped a thing, right? That's great. But that didn't consider all the downstream impact that was created as the result of that shipment, right? You had teams trying to solve all the problems. There were a number of bugs, first and foremost. There were expectation misalignment between the team members, or sorry, the go-to-market team and our customers. And so it's actually created way more burden on the company than it actually value it created, right? So there was an output, but the outcome wasn't quite what we were shooting for. So that's always stuck with me as that difference and really solidified this idea. And so knowing with my background, I see some familiar faces that will know directed discovery, and this has been talked about a lot in Product Hive. That was the foundation that I had in my time at Pluralsight. Pluralsight's where I really learned product management, and specifically human-centered design. That technique and approach, and that consideration for engaging with your users to understand their needs to inform where you go. So building on that, I started to learn more. And I had a professor in my master's program who had built this whole program around a model that he created. He had gone and grown a company, sold it. It started to flounder. He bought it back from that acquirer, grew it back up and sold it twice. And so he was a pretty successful entrepreneur. And one of my favorite professors, because he'd been in the field, had worked, and had a lot of wisdom to share. But he had this model that he implemented with the classes that I took from him, which was learn, do, become. And in that model, we would learn a new technique, but as soon as we learned it, almost right after we learned it, or while we were learning it, we engaged in some level of doing, right? We had a student-run venture fund where we would learn about due diligence, we'd learn about the financial drivers for a business, the product and strategy of a business. Then almost instantly, we jump into a project and do due diligence in partnership with a venture capital firm, determine whether or not to invest, right? So we started doing. And in that doing, combining with the learning, it solidified those things to become, I'm not a venture capitalist, but I have an appreciation and understanding of the financial drivers of business. And so following that model, that stuck with me. So as I think about, okay, directed discovery talks about human-centered design techniques. It has very specific stages that you move through with voice of customer, customer preference testing, customer confirmation testing, right? And then they have kind of a staged release. So that was a big inspiration for what I've implemented at Vasion. But it wasn't that alone. right? I talked about this book, Inspired. It's been talked about a lot in the product world. Marty Kagan details 4 risks. Those are the big piece, right? But he also talks about how teams operate, how engineers and designers and product managers work together. There's a lot of detailed information in there that you can apply, right? But I didn't stop there. I read about strategy. I read other product books. I read the blogs of thought leaders, right? Take all this information. I'm learning. At some point, it comes down to, I'm the one that's got to take this information and implement it in the organization, right? So that learn, do, become, following that model for myself has really helped me grow. And as I think about now, as a leader of teams, my responsibility is provide a space where teams can follow that same model and grow. And the thing about that learn, do, become model that I really like is, as you consume information, right? Today, you're going to take something away, whether it's something I've said or some conversation you've had with somebody you're sitting next to or whatever it is. And that's going to inform how you move forward on either a project you're working on at work, something you're doing at home, something, right? There's those takeaways. Every person that learns, follows that model of learn, do, become, they take the things that align with them, that fit with whether it's their personal values, their personal needs in the current situation and context they're in, and they apply those and move forward. And that's really stuck to me as I think about, okay, my goal in leading a team is not to be the one who has all the answers. Sometimes I might think that, but I gotta remember that's not the case and step back and say, okay, how do I provide a space that teams can go be successful, right? How can I empower team members to go and be successful? And that comes with sharing context, giving them knowledge about where to focus, and then clarity on what their outcomes are that they're driving. And when that's in place, that's the path I see to success. It's the difference between leading with context and leading with control. And that's really informed a lot of how I've tried to approach my leadership. So take all that learning, I'm joining Vasion, and my first goal is to learn. I want to understand and diagnose what the current situation is. So I do a lot of my own personal discovery. I meet with the team members, I meet with cross-functional groups, our go-to-market teams, our sales, marketing, et cetera. And I start to focus on our software development lifecycle or product development lifecycle. The big gap I see is there's a big emphasis on the build and the release, or what I have up here is adoption, right? Build it, ship it, build it, ship it, build it, ship it. There's not a lot of discovery on, or sorry, not a lot of emphasis on discovery. The discovery most likely came from either a sales request, hey, we got a deal, this is coming in, we got to close it. Some stakeholder input, right? This sounds familiar, I see some smiles and chuckles, right? Very familiar. Well, as I rolled out and focused on this development lifecycle, here's a kind of a view into what our process looked like. So you had things like feature requests, leadership asks from stakeholders. There's a little bit of market analysis, maybe some competitive intel. And that all kind of became these clouds of information that there was one person in the organization that synthesized that. That person was referred to as a strategist, and their goal was to then assign some level of priority to all the things that we could do. Here's the list of outputs to go pursue or projects to do. That was then sent to a product owner. That product owner would then write the stories, work with the engineering team. Sometimes UX was brought along, sometimes they weren't. We had one UX designer for 10 product managers. And then we went through a release process. And wow, that got quite a reaction. I'll come back to that. And then get it out to the end user, right? So this was our current process. This was our approach. And as I dug into this, I said, okay, here's an opportunity. I gathered enough context to feel like this is an opportunity to go and make an impact. So the first thing I did is focused on the team. Sorry, I realize there's a lag. I'm clicking and it's like a second here. So focused on the team, got that cross-functional group together, right? We needed more representation from UX design, especially as you think about print management. How many people have printed something? Man, those who are sleeping, you didn't raise your hand, I get it. When you print with our software, you have no idea that our software is even embedded in your device. Now, if you have some level of IT understanding, yeah, you're gonna get like an appreciation for that and recognize it. But we are making that shift from print management to digital transformation, and specifically business process automation, right? And the way I always talked about this is I, talk to people about our company. If you think about why you print, it's for there's some intention you have with that piece of paper that you're printing, right? I'm just going through a building process at home, and I had to go down to the city office, and they had this list of all the different applications. So I want to remove an easement from my property. So I got to download the form, and I got to take it to 5 different people. I sent 3 of them digitally, 2 of them I had to drop it off at their office. 4 of them have gotten back to me, and I'm hounding the last person, the last organization to get back to me to remove that easement. But you think about that process. I had to print, I had to fill out some information, I had to scan it on my device, right? Like that's the space that we're trying to move from. Adjacent to print is all of that business process automation. And that's our goal with digital transformation. However, when you print, do you know that that software is there? Well, now when you see software that you're either scanning or managing documents, you know that software is there. You're engaging with that software pretty heavily, right? So there was a good excuse for why one UX designer didn't work in the past, but that no longer could work. So we focused on the team, brought in UX design, and really emphasized the ownership and accountability of the team. So in that previous model, once a team shipped a thing, that team was disbanded and grouped. They were project teams focused on delivering a specific output. Once that output was shipped, then they move on to the next thing. Bug comes in for the old thing, and they're like, hey, who worked on that? Oh man, that was like 4 years ago. Go to the expert everyone knows. He's been here long enough. He's worked on everything in the company, right? That doesn't help you scale. That doesn't help you grow. So divvying out all the responsibilities and the ownership across multiple teams, adding the cross-functional team, right? And you can see the influence from those resources I talked about. That was important to set up. But there were some bumps along the way as we tried to do that. Together with that, that team now focuses on building a relationship with the end user. Just shift here. So in doing that, right, you move from that world where there's those clouds of information that go to one person, that one person then sets priority and then moves it through a project. Well, now, as a team, cross-functional team with UX design and engineering, establish that relationship with the end user. Take all that same, take all that same information that was considered by the strategist and put it in the context of the conversations you have with your end user. What are they really trying to accomplish? What is their job to be done? With that context in mind, now you start to shape a solution. And maybe you do some discovery on that solution through prototyping, some usability interviews, at Pluralsight, what we called CPTs, right? You'd get that user feedback and inform your solution. Then you'd move through the build process. And of course, we know it's not always linear. It's always back and forth, right? But for simplicity of the document or the diagram, you move through with your engineering team, build it, have some level of release process, and then get it out to your end user. But it doesn't stop there. The difference between outputs and outcomes in my mind is this feedback loop. That team is clear on the outcome they're driving, but that output may or may not have actually created that outcome. How do you know? Well, did you define up front how you're going to measure success? Do you have the systems and tools to measure that success? And are you monitoring that, right? And as that data comes back, that becomes an additional data point, whether it be that product data, product usage data, or establishing that voice of customer. You have more data points to consider and evaluate as you move through the process. So I'm on this journey. I've been at Vasion a little over a year and a half. And it's like, it's all smooth sailing, right? I'm just cruising on my mountain bike down this trail, no rocks, no bumps, everything's fine. Well, change is hard. As I've seen a lot of head nods in this room, is all this stuff makes sense? It doesn't always make sense when you get to maybe outside your organization with sales, with marketing, with people in your organization. Maybe someone's like, we've always done it this way, this works, right? So as I go down this path, I start to find challenges that are preventing us from getting there. And that's what I really want to get into, right? The goal of today's talk was to emphasize things I've learned through change management, because as I think back on all those logos I've worked with, or worked for, I should say, one of the most consistent things is about change management. In my time at Qualtrics, I was trying to implement a whole different way to approaching how sales territories were carved up and divvy it among teams. I was messing with people's dollars, with their income and their potential income. That change was pretty hard to lead, right? As I've joined other organizations, change has been a common theme that's present. And here at Vasion, it's right at the front. And as I'm doing that and driving that change, one of the big things that I've tried to do is treat my team and my organization as my product. Listen to the feedback. You know, those same processes that you follow for developing a product, I really consider my organization like a product. And I'm looking at the outcome. Are we achieving our outcomes? Are we successful in the things we're doing? And I've got some success criteria that I've set up that I'm monitoring and evaluating. And I use that feedback. But as I've moved down this path and run into some roadblocks and some challenges, it's led me to 3 key learnings that I want to share today. So the first one, any Kendrick Lamar fans? Okay, no? All right, first one, stay humble. As I came into the organization and I was working on change, a lot of people come to me looking to me as the expert on product. You know, I had things to weigh in on marketing and sales and sales enablement because I had experience there. My ego got a little inflated. I felt pretty good about the knowledge and the contribution I was making to the organization, right? But more important than staying humble on the ego side is don't get blinded and fall in love with your solutions, right? We hear this a lot in product, right? Focus on the problem, not the solution. The same thing applies. If I'm treating my organization like my product, getting a little feedback, Jeremy, the volume. Okay. So if I'm treating my organization like my product, I got to listen to that feedback and monitor that, but be open to new ideas. Consider that I don't have all the answers. And this really hit home just a few weeks ago as I was working on a change in my organization, and I was dead set on what that change needed to be, but the way that I was approaching it, not even that the change, whether or not the change needed to happen, but the way that I was approaching it wasn't working and leading to the outcome. It was demoralizing the team. I could feel the air come out of the room when I would join conversations. I left a one-on-one with a team member, and I felt right when I hung up that I had approached it wrong. And this hit me in the face when I listened to a recent podcast from Silicon Slopes. And so as I listened to that and reevaluated, it kind of put me in this place. It's like, you already know this, but you've forgotten it, or you've moved forward in a way that didn't represent that learning you already had, right? I had the learning, I wasn't thinking about it when I was doing, so I hadn't become that thing I wanted. Didn't get the outcome that I was looking for. So stay humble. That's number 1. Number 2, don't react to everything. Any Game of Thrones fans? Season 6 and prior, not season 7 and 8? All right. Okay. This is season, is it 7 or 6? Okay. The Battle of the Bastards. All right. So this backstory here, this guy in the middle who's looking up, looks in a pretty desperate situation, right? Well, he had a pretty clear outcome that led him to this. He had his brother who was captured by an opponent, right? And he was trying to get him back. And in trying to do that, he got lured into a trap, a pretty clear trap, but he fell right into it, right? I think number 1 applies a little bit too. But he stepped right into that trap and he found himself in this situation. And it was by the skin of his teeth that he survived it. But using this metaphor and thinking about this example, I've never read The Art of War, but I've read the Cliff Notes or Spark Notes, whatever. And the thing I always thought about from that is there's multiple ways to solve a problem. If you're always trying to tackle it head on, you're never going to fully get the outcome you want to get to. Sometimes you got to take a side approach. Maybe you have to leverage someone else to go solve the problem for you, right? There's multiple ways to solve the problem. Well, it's really easy to get lured into a trap if you're trying to react to every bit of information that you have. And in this situation, Jon Snow here got sucked into a trap that almost cost him his life. But in our jobs, right, if our goal is to get feedback, our goal is to listen to our users and use that to inform where we go next, then how do we determine what to listen to and what not to listen to? How much do you listen to from your sales organization, from your marketing organization, from your CEO, from your boss, from your peers, right? All of that matters. Synthesis, is the term that I hear often around this, right? How do you synthesize information, step back and look at the big picture to evaluate? So don't react to everything. And the last one, some like the old better than the new. Any BMW fans in here? Car fans? Okay. New M3, the latest generation, the original M3. There's plenty of opinions about this and whether or not one is better looking than the other, one's better than the other, right? There's good in both. And I found this to be especially true as I've tried to implement change in our organization. I have this clear vision of what I think we need to do, how our approach is, focus on outcomes, less on outputs, right? But in emphasizing that, especially with our engineering teams, some people became a little bit lost, a little unclear on what that relationship between outputs and outcomes is. If we're so focused on outcomes, well, then how come this team over here is focused on outputs? What's that unique scenario that I need to understand? Or does that mean, as an engineer, my job's not to ship code anymore, right? Like, there was this level of confusion that was presented by focusing so much on the outcome piece and less on the outputs. But it's not about outputs not mattering, right? There's something from the old way of doing things that got you to where you are. You've got to respect the past, and as you move forward, bring those things forward that still are relevant and look to incorporate. The same idea with the learn, do, become. Take all the information that you had, all that learning, and as you start doing, some things work and some things don't. Those things that do work, keep doing them, right? Monitor your results, have your success criteria. The things that aren't working, shift, right? In my mind, the biggest kind of difference between outcomes and outputs is, I mean, I talked about that scenario where we rushed the thing to market. Yay, we shipped a thing, right? That's very output centric, right? We're celebrating the output. Well, if you're outcome centric, it's we shipped the thing, and because of that, we saw A and B go up, but C actually went down, right? Our success criteria, our metrics. So we're focused on C and trying to improve that, right? That's where we're focused next. It's a totally different conversation than, yay, we shipped a thing. So all this has led me to a model that I've been trying to implement in my team and continue to craft and revise. So think about why companies exist. Revenue, growth, not always. Most tech companies are focused on growth. Grow margin, increase margin, right? There's KPIs that as a business you're focused on, right? I'd lump all these in this area of impact. They're high-level metrics, most of what our executives are focused on, but on product teams, we have not little, but we cannot impact them directly. So how do we build up to and create the impact we want with all the things that precede it? So let's go back to the beginning. Start with resources. Resources include the code that you have, the team that you have, maybe there's existing market, customers, whatever that may be. There's a level of resources that come together. Next, building on those resources, there's a level of activity that happens. I really emphasize the discovery piece, right? Engaging in discovery, engaging with your users, that's the level of activity. That then leads to some delivery effort. Writing code, sprint planning, or whatever, however your development is organized. Those activities come together to then build something, your outputs, right? So this emphasis on outputs or outcomes, it's not that they're mutually exclusive. In fact, I always refer to these three things as the plan, right? You have the resources, how you're going to leverage those resources, what activities you're going to do with them, and then what outcomes what outputs do you produce? Those things come together in your plan. That's your intention. Whether or not you're going to get that outcome, you don't know until after the thing is shipped and you've had some level of time to see whether or not it's making the impact that you want, right? So that brings in this gap between the impact and the plan, and that is outcomes. And this model I pulled from a book that I've read, of course, but this book this model comes from the nonprofit world, and their definition of outcome has really stuck with me. And it's a change in human behavior that drives business results. So if you think about that as outcomes, right? And I often refer to it as like the result after you ship the thing, after the output, right? Your outcomes are whether or not that thing that you built and all the preceding activities and resources came together in a way that it changed and influenced your users in a way that now you can expect that to create the impact you want. Grow revenue, retention, whatever that business KPI is, you're focused on outcomes that you can drive as a team. And the key piece with this, right, and kind of stepping away from this like IC role, like if I'm a product manager working in this model, I can work through this. But how do I know what is the right outcome to pursue? And that's where leadership comes in. If we as leaders create clarity on where a team is focused, right? You've got this high-powered vehicle, if you will. Where do you point it? Where do you focus that team? They've got to be crystal clear on what their outcomes are. And when that's not clear, they're going to flounder, right? I talked about empowering teams with 3 things: context, knowledge, and skills. So 4, knowledge and skills are the second. And then the third is clarity. Clarity on their outcome, clarity on how they're going to get there, who comes together to create that. And when you combine those 3 things and have a team focused on outcomes, step back and let them surprise you, right? Let them determine, okay, we shipped a thing, but because of that, we saw some things go down, some other things go up. We're focused here. If I'm leading with control instead of context, I'm saying, hey, ship these things, do these activities, leverage these resources. But as a leader, if I'm leading with context, it's, I create clarity here on the outcomes because I know what those outcomes are going to do to drive the impact that I'm committed to delivering for the business. But with that context, I can then share with the team, hey, this is your space, your ownership. This is your outcome you're driving. With that, empower them to go leverage the resources, activities, and the outputs. Step back and let them surprise you. And you'll see how that team can take work that they're doing and create business impact. Thank you, everyone.
We'll open it up for
Time
Q&A.
questions if there's any questions in
Raise
the
your
room.
hand.
Don't be shy. Yeah, right up here, Jeremy, up front, and then over there.
How much selling do you have to do or socialization to get these type of changes here? I mean,
Yeah.
these are all great ideas, but how do you sell it to the people who are skeptical?
Yeah, great question. So I was very fortunate. I had great support from the executive ranks coming in, right? My leaders on the executive team and had this as an initiative and had buy-in from the CEO. So as I came in, I had that. Where the real selling comes is those cross-functional organizations who don't have full context of your approach, right? The sales team who's trying to close a deal who doesn't understand why this thing's taking so long to build. So there's a lot of selling that happens there, right, in the organization. Helping them see the big picture. And again, leading with context is giving them an understanding, hey, here's where we're trying to go, what we're trying to accomplish. Here's that level of context. That means all these things that you're looking here of what you need, but all these things have to fall into place so that we're not just solving for this immediate need that you have, but this longer term vision of what we're trying to create for the broader company. And when I do that, I find people on their heads saying, okay, I get it, but when do I get it, right? So there's still a level of that, and that tension will always exist, and it's how you navigate that. And I think the key is what you communicate, what context you share, and that goes a long way. Yeah. There was one, yeah.
I'm wondering when you're getting your teams to rewrite, essentially reframe the way they think about building the product from outputs to outcomes, how do you help them? Do you have any kind of framework that you rely on or a way to transition them through rethinking like an output to an outcome? For example, like a feature request or something, right, from a customer to then how do we shape this thing into a measurable outcome?
Yeah. I didn't add this one as a learning, but this was a big one where in my model of empowering teams with knowledge and slash skills, right? There's a level of training where you've had a certain approach and now your scope has grown to where you just kind of take the prioritized list and go execute to, I actually have to kind of define and set those priorities. So I brought in a lot of resources for training. That was some of the learning, some of the books that I mentioned, as well as brought in a UX researcher by trade who did a lot of training for us. And so providing a level of resources is helpful, but it still rests on the continual coaching and mentoring from leadership to ensure that you're clear on your outcome. You're seeing how what you're learning, discovery, how feature requests, how do those all fit in the context of the outcome you're trying to get to? Yeah.
You alluded that this is kind of transcendent from, this doesn't just apply to product management, this process, right? It applies to other parts. You were talking about motorcycles, things like that. So can you give an example of someone, a group or organization that's done this, that you've observed that's done this really well?
Someone who's applied this model. It's a great question. Hadn't thought of it that way. Back on the slide where I talked about all the different resources I've leveraged, like I've benefited from working close to great leaders and seeing them apply the same model. And it's versions of it, right? Like this is my articulation that I've pulled, but I talk about how all those things come together and really influence how I think about it. So I am not coming up with one specific example that comes to mind, but I think of the leaders at those previous organizations that I've been at that have all done this in a way, right? That as you see, the KPIs that you talk about in success come from all these preceding things getting you there, right? And whether or not they fully acknowledge that, but I kind of look at it and evaluate all those pieces coming together to get to the outcome or the impact on the business that they're trying to get to. Yeah.
What have you seen as far as getting a team to work towards an outcome that was the right layer of, like, this is a 3-month outcome or a year outcome or 1 week outcome?
Yeah.
What have you found works and helps teams, especially as they're transitioning to this way?
Yeah, it's a great question because we have 2 kind of areas in our product group. We have an existing product, that PrinterLogic product, who's really working on like sustaining innovation, right? It's improvements on the existing thing. And then there's the net new product that we're building in that digital transformation space that we're trying to get to market. Those are very different problems, very different teams taking different approaches with different time horizons. So all of those factors come in. So have I found a sweet spot? Not exactly. For this team over here, it's looking at and evaluating, do you have a baseline of your outcome? Do you have a baseline of what you're trying to get to? And one of the things I didn't emphasize as much in this, that's kind of in my ideal vision, is the availability of data. Having good data that supports your outcomes is a key piece to make this model work. And so do you have a baseline of what your outcome is currently? And previous things that you've done, how has it impacted that, right? So you think about an existing thing. We've aligned on a North Star using the North Star framework from Amplitude around unique business processes. And so we think about printing as a process, and there's different types of printing that you can do in that world. And then over here, there's workflows and automation, and there's different types of processes there. And so with that, what in the domain of a team, their outcome is driving something that contributes to those unique business processes. We have a print service that's unique, that connects to backend systems. So for them, they have this unique service that's separate from our end user printing, and they're trying to grow the volume of that. Right now, it's a net new product. We have a handful of customers that are in it. So over time, they're going to be looking at metrics like the volume of print per customer and that sort of thing. But right now, they're trying to get those first few in, right? So back to the time frame, it depends on the context of the problem that the team's trying to solve. And I've really tried to emphasize, look at the problem you're trying to solve and break that down into milestones. Establish a baseline, and over this milestone, this time frame, here's the success we anticipate getting to. And we've adopted OKRs. But we've had OKRs, but we've tried to leverage OKRs as the vehicle to really move our outcomes forward. And we do that on a quarterly basis. So that becomes kind of our default time frame of how much progress do we expect to make in 3 months.
We'll do 2 more questions and then Ben will be up here if you need to talk to him afterwards.
Hey, Ben, thank you for the great presentation. So
Yeah.
like you talked about, you were moving the company from one successful product to a completely new market. So how do you think about the users? Were they the same users that you were building for, or finding the new set of users? If it's the new set of users,
Yeah.
how are you getting the user feedback? Because that's where I'm struggling with right now. I'm moving the company in a different direction without like existing users be the user of the product. So
Yeah.
how do you get that feedback just based on market analysis and competitive analysis?
Yeah, I'm kind of smirking because my team's over here probably like shuddering at the question, because it's one of the biggest challenges we've had to overcome is when you didn't have a relationship with your end user, you have to build that. And then when you're building a new product, there's this question of, is that persona the same as the persona that uses this product, right? And it's one of the biggest debates that we have in the organization right now. And, so what I would say to it is building the processes that establish connections and gather connections to your end users to be able to leverage those relationships and ask those questions, right? So we have IT admins that are primary persona for print, right? They manage and set up the print infrastructure. As we talked about, like everyone's printed something, but you've not engaged with our software. At least you might not know that you've engaged with it, right? But that IT admin knows it very well. So the push I've made to a couple team members recently is think about in those conversations, help them see the big picture of what we're trying to do, and then ask them, as you think about this, do any of these things fall in your world? Who do you know in your organization that would actually be responsible for some of those? Leverage those existing relationships and connections you have to move into the organization. It's the same thing the sales team does when they're trying to sell and find their champion, right? Engage with who you have and work your way through the organization to get to that. And understanding the big picture of the problem we're trying to solve helps give them context to understand, oh yeah, so-and-so is actually responsible for that. And so we've had some success with that in some of our print admins identifying or seeing the big picture of what we're trying to do and bringing team members along with them to customer events and that sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah, you bet. One more, or are we done?
I was just going to ask what book you would recommend an organization start with if they're interested in working more towards this. Like if you have alignment and you know that's the direction you want to go, what's the first book that you would recommend teams read to start adopting that outcome-driven result?
So I have a tough time answering that without like some context of where the organization is at, right? Because if your focus is on outcomes, like from a product perspective, Inspired is one of the best books to start with. But I would actually point you to Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. That is probably the number one that I would start with, for especially if you're trying to get buy-in from a broader part of the organization. Because it uses a 3-part framework that I really like. First is diagnosis, then guiding principles, and then clear, I can't remember the exact term it uses, but essentially how you move forward on that. A lot of people think of strategy as a detailed plan of how you're going to execute. Well, when you use this framework, you're like, actually, no, that's not it, because what happens when this, right? It's the Mike Tyson quote, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? Like, so with that, what's your framework? You have a clear understanding of the problems you're trying to solve, your diagnosis. With that, what principles need to be true for you to be successful? Your kind of guiding principles. And then it's coherent actions. That's what it is, how you move forward. So with those two in mind, that then determines how you go forward. And with that context that really resonates with someone in marketing, someone in the sales, corporate strategy, the C-suite, then you can bring in things like, here's how a different approach to product management helps us there, right? You think about diagnosis, that's discovery. Do you have a clear understanding of your users and the problems they're trying to solve, right? So you can start to see these parallels between all the books. Yeah. Yeah, great question. Thanks, everybody. I'll hang out if anyone wants to chat afterward.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks again, Ben. Thank you, MX, for hosting and for the food Vasion. And we'll see you at an upcoming event. Thanks, everyone.